As I said, we're a true admirer of your work, not only your NFL acumen and background, but also your leadership ability and the coaching ability. We're ardent fans of the coach, and I'm an ardent fan of the shuffle. And working with Dr. McHugh in a marketing capacity, I just thought this would be a natural conversation to talk about two people who have reached apex levels of their respected professions. And I think you made a comment on the shuffle about neurosurgeons and comparing them to head coaches about 6 months ago, and that struck with me ever since. And so this is a real pleasure to have you, and I'd like to introduce you to Dr. McHugh, board-certified neurosurgeon. Dr. McHugh, Michael Lombardi, three-time Super Bowl champion, NFL executive, leadership coach, and best-selling author.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Brian. Doctor.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Lombardi. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks, John. That was a great intro, and we're really excited about this and reading up on everything you've been doing, and you've had a fascinating career for sure. Like John said, this isn't live streaming or anything like that. We can edit all of it post-op, so no reason to worry about anything. I think we just started this kind of as a passion project. I've been a neurosurgeon in practice here in New York for several years, and not that it gets boring, but you start to make observations along that journey, and this has been a nice vehicle to kind of reach out and touch other folks in different fields and start to pull wisdom from different pillars across the landscape. And it's just been a passion project so far, and a lot of fun, frankly. And all we've really done is try and get to know the individual guests, because I think people's life stories are just absolutely fascinating. And then, of course, as that story develops, if you're comfortable sharing information about your past, usually there's crossover between the journey you've been on and what we're doing in neurosurgery, and there's lessons to be drawn from all sides of it, has been our experience. So it's not like we have some formula that we look to reenact every time we do a show, and I don't think we're not trying to get tips from you on next season's bets or anything, but I just found you had a fascinating career, and I know it sounds like it started in 1984, but if you don't mind rewinding in your head, like, what point were you at there in your life? Like, how old were you? Did you always know you wanted to do something with professional sports as a kid? Is this like, you were in the Little League field, the Pop Warner field, or did this develop out of something different?
I think there have been the advent of television created rock stars, right? I mean, how many rock stars have you read that saw Elvis or the Beatles on TV and wanted to become them? Springsteen, Billy Joel, name them, right? They all saw the Ed Sullivan Show, or they saw Elvis, and I was different. I saw a guy on TV who looked like he belonged at my family dinners, and on Sunday with the big nose and olive skin and the same last name, and I thought, I want to follow that guy anywhere, I want to do what he's doing. I want to born to run. I want to get out of this little town that's on the Jersey Shore, and so ever since I saw him, I might have been 8 years old, and I knew I wanted to work in football. I mean, I wanted to work in football. I loved playing baseball, but I really wanted to be in football, and I kind of got along that path, and everything that I did in my life was to try to get to football. So when I was in college, I played football. I would go to coaching clinics. I went to Hofstra in Long Island there, and every off season, I would go to coaching clinics, try to meet people, learn about football, because I was determined to cross Highway 9 and chase a dream, and so that's kind of where it all started. So, my first pro job was in '84. I got a job at UNLV making no money in '81. And then I got hired as Bill Walsh's driver basically in '84. And, I've been fortunate to have been able to be in a circle of elite. I've worked for Walsh and Belichick and Al Davis, and, been around Parcells and having, relationships with these legendary coaches who have been able to I've been able to learn a lot from. And you talk about doing this pod, it made me think tomorrow is July 12th, and it'll be 4 years since Coach Raveling and I and Kamadi Ramsey and Alex Servacio, we started the Daily Coach, 4 of us. Mm-hmm. And, that's 1,460 days that we've actually written something every single day. And it's been an incredible, incredible experience.
Right, yeah.
Because we had no idea where we were going to go. And today we have 36,000 email subscribers. We have a 45% open rate on our emails. And so none of us were in the newsletter business. None of us were ever that. And so I think when you have a childlike ambition like I had when I was 9 years old,
yep.
and then I had it again when I was 58 to do the Daily Coach, or 60 when I did the Daily Coach, it's kind of really a good thing.
Yeah, you can feel the youthful energy from it. It's an odd, I don't know if that's any pivot anyone makes, in their career. It's just kind of something that's new, kind of reminds you of youth, or what that phenomenon is, but it's definitely...
Yeah, I mean, Parcells has the creed of youth on his office. He always would tell me about it. MacArthur didn't write it, but he used it in his farewell speech at West Point when he talked about the core. And, and he said in that speech, he said, age doesn't weary the mind, a lack of curiosity does. And I think a lot of that has been true. And when I sat in Los Angeles when I was writing Gridiron Genius, I was sitting with Coach Rav, and I would have dinner once a month, and we both were reading $1 Trillion Coach about Bill Campbell. And we both looked at each other and said, we both need a coach, and that's kind of how we started the Daily Coach.
That's interesting. Yeah.
The one thing about if I may interject, Dr. McHugh, the one thing about the coach that really tied it together for us is some of the pieces that are in there that intertwine with the medical world and also the sports world and life in general at the same time. And I think a few in the past few weeks have really spoken to that. Dr. McHugh and I were discussing the article with the cardiothoracic surgeon from the University of Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, and just talking about Dr. McHugh's experiences in the operating room and his role as a deformity surgeon. If you want to elaborate, Dr. McHugh, on what that entails, I think it would be interesting how it paralleled that gentleman's path as well.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Oh, hi, Beowulf. I didn't know you were on there. Yeah, I think, and just for my edification, Mr. Lombardi, those articles on the Daily Coach, when you guys interviewed that doctor, for example, are you all sitting down chatting with him, or is that a journalist that kind of sits with him?
No. We have a young man named Trevor Kapp who does the Saturday things.
Oh, I see.
And he kind of comes up with the idea of who to interview, and sometimes I come up with a guy to interview, or I might have given a speech somewhere and met somebody that seemed like it would be a really good idea to talk about. We tried to use we used to like the corner office from the Sunday Times, used to have this thing called the corner office, and we kind of wanted to use that for Saturday, kind of steal that idea and make it our own. Mm-hmm. And so we not necessarily wanted to use people from the sports world, because the Daily Coach is about coaching, and coaching involves your profession, my profession, everybody. It's how do we get people to play at a higher level? How do we get performance at a higher level? And and so if you just constantly go down the coaching road, it kind of gets a little bit myopic. And so what we try to do is try to broaden it out. And I tend to lean more towards the creative people because I think one of the things that I probably wish I would have had read more on was creativity when I was working in the league, and how to become more creative.
That's interesting.
And so, I tend to gravitate. I was with Peter Kaufman, who runs Glen Eyre, when I was in Los Angeles, and he got me started on reading books about people that create for a living, and have to look at a blank piece of paper and find some way to communicate. I think that forces your mind to work, and knowing in the 4 years of the Daily Coach, like I there's not something that happens in my day I wouldn't say, well, that'll be a good Daily Coach idea.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, that triggers something in my mind where we were going back to your history, and you had said one question I meant to ask you. was, you'd mentioned playing in college. When did you know you wouldn't be a player in the league? You wanted to be working in football, but that clearly wasn't going to be a player. Did you ever have dreams of that, or was it always, okay, where's my angle to be part of
I
this?
knew because of my lack of height and and size and athletic skills, you kind of have a pretty good read on that. And I was fortunate enough to play 4 years of college football, which I enjoyed. We started out at Hofstra. We were a Division II team, then we transferred down to 3, and it was great. It was fun, and it was being part of a team. But you kind of knew that there was a level of athleticism that was above where you were, and there was a physicality above where you were in terms of size. So once I knew that, I felt like, okay, well, then if I can't play the game, I got to know enough about the game to be able to speak with some effectiveness and talk about the game. What I've learned through my career is players don't care about if you played or didn't. They don't care if you're 15 or 80. They care if you have enough knowledge to make them better. That's what they care about. Today, in this world we live in today, information is currency.
Yeah. And that was going to dovetail with what the previous thing you were just highlighting on. When you leave that kind of formal player-coach relationship, and you went in and, like you said, started working with Bill Walsh, and I would reflect on this as a surgeon, although there are mentors and there is a apprenticeship model in surgery, it's not the same thing as someone standing over and coaching you. And I would imagine you had a similar experience where as a player you had an actual coach, right? And then you transition to the roles you went to take on professionally where there's no one whose job it is to coach you, but you do need coaching. Does that make sense? And there's an element where I feel, I know I had this epiphany myself, where I think maybe it's the education system, I'd say whatever it is, there's this sense that it's someone's job to get you to the next level, like your third grade teacher is supposed, their job's to get you to the fourth grade. And then you get into the professional world and it doesn't matter to anyone really, if you sink or swim, and it's kind of your job to allow yourself to be coached, or to seek out the coaching you need, maybe is the better way to put it. And I guess you're in a unique situation where you went from a player with a coach to then saying, well, I want to stay in the league, I'm going to get a job. How did you reframe that mentally, where now your, I guess, quote, mentors are your coaches, presumably, sorry to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming that's how you progress forward. That's a slight shift in the relationship. Do you remember that moment? Do you remember that thought process?
Yeah, I never felt like I was, because I played at a smaller level, the intellectual capacity that what I was learning at clinics was different than what I was learning on the field. So I knew if you visualize a video game your kids play, I knew I had to get to another level. Like I was on level 1, I needed to get to level 3. And so I needed to try to find somebody to get me to level 3.
Right.
And that's a hard thing, and we all need that. I think that's one of the biggest gaps in coaching and leadership is that who's coaching the coach. The NFL is $1 billion industry. The Washington Commanders are going to sell for $6 billion. Right. Who's helping Ron Rivera be a better leader? Who's coaching Ron Rivera? We say, well, he doesn't need a coach. He played in the NFL and he's coached for all these years. No, Ron Rivera needs somebody outside his world to tell him the truth, to basically be honest with him. And we have a problem in most businesses is we confuse loyalty and devotion. Really bad. So loyalty is a word that's often used in the NFL. You got to be loyal to me. You got to be loyal to me. Well, being loyal means I'm going to tell you the truth. Being devoted is me telling you what you want to hear. Right? You remember Muhammad Ali had this trainer, Bundy Brown, and he was, Bundy Brown, you're the champ, you're the champ, you're the champ. He never told Muhammad you needed to run. He never told Muhammad you need to get in shape. Angelo Dundee told him all those things.
Right.
right? And so I think there's a huge void in most people's lives where they confuse loyalty and devotion. And so they surround themselves with people that are devoted to them, that tell them what they want to hear. And they take argument and they take discourse as a bad thing when it's actually a really good thing.
Yeah.
I learned that in one of the Coach Walsh's lessons was, if you believe something, then seek the information on the other side to prove that you're right. And that's for me, like if you believe, when I'm scouting a player, if I take the approach, I hate this player to start with, and by the end I like the player, that's really a good way to view a player. But if I take this player that I love the player to start with, and then all I do is collect information and I overlook all his weaknesses,
right,
then it's a bad thing. And to me, that's really what happens in a lot of leadership roles.
Something, as you're talking, something occurred to me, and I wonder how this plays out in the fields you've worked in. When we talk about training surgeons, there's this phrase "master surgeon," right? And I remember being a young trainee and struck when an elder mentor, I mean, this gentleman was probably in his late 70s at the time, and he said, well, the way we do it, it's 4 years of medical school and 7 years of training, and then maybe a fellowship to get fine-tuned, and then you're a, quote, attending level surgeon, so you're on your own. And he said, well, it's generally understood that it's an additional 7 years after that to become a master surgeon. And I remember at the time being totally like, what are you talking about? I'm here for what to a young person feels like eons, right? And then you're telling me when I graduate all of this, I'm essentially a rookie, and it's another, essentially decade before I'm a master of my craft. But now I'm 45 and I've been in practice 9 years, and he was dead right. There's a distinct sort of line. It's not a fine line in the sand, but it's somewhere in that time frame where you say, oh, now I can kind of, I feel like I've sort of mastered this craft. Not to sound, overly confident, but it's another leveling off. And in your world, is there a equivalent to that, like in your own career, where you see people working their way through systems and organizations and constantly learning, obviously, but then, okay, now I'm at the quote apex level here. I'm the leader, and it's like, well, no, not really. There's another, 10 years, 7 years beyond that. There's sort of a flow state that's more masterful, if that's even the right word.
There used to be that dynamic, and now that the media is more involved, these positions are elected, no longer selected. When you're in a profession like yours, you're in a selected position because you have to go through this giant constant change. And if you join the carpenters union, the UPS driver, he gets it every day. If you go through the carpenters union, you become an apprentice carpenter, then you become a carpenter. And then all carpenters are the same. Well, that's great for a union, but that's not great for a doctor or for somebody who's. So you have to find a way to gain experience and wisdom through time. And because the NFL has now become a league of become elected, where if you get your name out there and people in the media start promoting you, you become electable. It's much like our political system, right?
Interesting.
You can carry the New Hampshire primary. You color all of a sudden, you really don't have any experience, okay? And then you get there, and then you realize, wait a minute, I'm not really ready for this job.
Right.
I have no chance of doing this job.
Right.
But because you got elected, you can't say no to it. Had you been selected, that's why we don't see. But remember, we're entertainment, so they want a young, good-looking guy on the sideline. They want somebody who everybody's looking for the child prodigy. Everybody's looking for Goodwill Hunting, some guy who can solve an equation on a blackboard at 15 years old. And they keep thinking that they're around when the experienced guy kind of is what we need.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to a prodigy doctor. I want to go to somebody who's done it before 1,000 times.
Right.
Experience matters. Yeah.
if I may interject, Michael, you work with some Mount Rushmore figures in the league, whether it was Walsh, Davis, of course, Belichick. And one of the things that we talk about at our practice is craftsmanship. Dr. McHugh in particular, especially being a deformity surgeon, there's a level of sophistication and skill set that goes along with it. What made those men so special during your time with them? And in Dr. McHugh's case, when you lean back on mentors that you work with in the medical field, what separates that, say, for example, someone who's just that surgeon who's just coming out of fellowship from that master surgeon?
So Walsh and Belichick have very similar backgrounds. They've struggled to get head coaching interviews for a long time. They served as assistants for longer than they should have. I mean, we interviewed Bill Belichick's first head coaching interview happened at the Hilton Hotel in Mobile, Alabama. I think he was like 42 years old or something. I mean, he was, it was like he couldn't get a sniff. He'd won 2 Super Bowls or won 1 Super Bowl, coached in another, been a defensive coordinator for a long time, coached in the league, had this impressive, but he couldn't get an interview because it was deemed back then he wasn't ready enough. He didn't have enough seasoning. Same thing with Walsh. Walsh was developed the West Coast offense in Cincinnati. And when he didn't get the head coaching job in Cincinnati, he had to go to San Diego to be the offensive coordinator. He was more than enough time. Lombardi, the same way. Lombardi struggled. He was 49 when he got his first head coaching job in Green Bay. He had a chance to take the Eagle job 2 years earlier, but he turned it down. But it was a struggle. He served a long apprenticeship as an assistant. And I think that's what made those men great. Because when they got into the problem, they'd seen the problem before. This isn't an anomaly. Like, we've had this happen. I saw this when I was working for Ted Marchibroda, or I saw this when I was working for Paul Brown, or I saw this when I was working for, Bill Parcells or someone. You see it before. It's the same thing, I'm sure, with you, Dr. McHugh. You are a better doctor today than you were when you first started because you got more practice.
Yeah, I was as you were talking, this resonated because one of the things that makes it a unique training, I guess, is I managed to squeeze in some additional fellowship training, and when you're exposed to folks who, I don't know what the right word is, have prowess in the profession, and you can see them succeed, you can see them fail, and then you're down the road in your own career, like you were saying with those gentlemen, and you can think back and say, I saw X individual who in your mind was the senior statesman at the time, and you say this is what he did or she did, and either succeeded or failed. It is experience, but there's also some comfort in that, right? Like the anxiety of the current situation seeming nebulous, and you having to make a decision without full information. You can fall back on, well, I saw people who are, as highly regarded as you could possibly be, do something like this. So I know there's some familiarity with the emotion, if that makes sense. I don't know. But that when you were talking about those extended apprenticeships and being able to just take in more, I'm thinking of one particular spine surgeon who I obviously won't name names, but I saw a couple bad outcomes. And you say, okay, look, good people have bad outcomes. So if then I stumble at some point along the road, it's like, well, hey, that guy had a bad outcome, so that's something you can deal with. You don't feel alone, I guess. And that's not just with failures. I'm sure that's with successes also, right? It's I would imagine if you see a great coach earn it, it's a long uphill. This isn't something quick and easy. So when you're in the trenches, trying to create a winning record. You can look back and say, look, I watched this person who ended up being legendary really put in, the elbow grease to get this. It's not an easy path. I mean, that's what I would think of just while you're talking. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking, if I may, was one of the things I noticed, and granted, this career is much more, there's a pathway, right? It's like X years here, and then you transition, and et cetera. And those transitions were always highlighted, right? So you graduate medical school, they put on a longer white coat, and now you have your own license and you're a doctor. And there's that sort of, you're prepped for that. Like everything in the culture of the institution speaks to that as a big transition, okay? And then one of the things that always struck me in practice was the transition from the final day of training to being on your own was never built up. No one ever took you aside and said, look, this is a major transition. You need to really brace for this. It was more kind of a encouragement, like, okay, you've seen it all, you've done it all, you'll be fine. And then in reality, that was probably one of the harshest transitions because there's no one else in the room, right? You're finally flying the plane all by yourself. And I know your experience isn't as dictated in terms of timeline, but can you reflect back at all and recognize a similar feeling where you were taken aback by the degree of the transition you had made? Like, is there that break point somewhere? Yeah.
I think it happens all the time. I mean, when I first when I was in Cleveland, and I was in charge of the whole player personnel department, you kind of, you're there, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is overwhelming. I don't have anybody to do. And I remember reading about John Kennedy when he became president, and he was so young, and everybody was in love with Camelot, and he called Harold Macmillan, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, to have somebody help mentor him. He hired Macmillan, and that kind of what I wanted to do. I needed to rely on people to help me because I knew that I got to where I wanted to. That was great, but I needed to be good at the job. I couldn't just be in the job.
Right.
You got to be great at the job.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a blown opportunity.
How do I do great? How do I stay in the job? I think that's what we miss. I tell coaches all the time, basketball, football, it doesn't matter what sport you're in. When you become a head coach, it's no different than sailing across the Atlantic. The first 100 miles you're off the coast, it's pretty mundane. But you go 200 miles out, you go 1,000 miles out to the Atlantic Ocean, and all of a sudden those storms are way different, and there's nothing you can prepare for. Nobody can tell you about those storms until you live through them. And I think there's a lot of that, and everybody thinks it's going to be just a smooth ride, and it's not. It's going to be really, really hard.
Right.
And you better have somebody you could call on who's not devoted to you, who's loyal to you, and tell you, here's what you need to do.
Right. This may be a misconception of something like the NFL. In my head, it's almost like a university. Like, is there an alumni group that's very welcoming of folks in these roles? Like, when you were coming up, did people say, hey, I'm in my 60s, 70s, give me a call. I'm happy to help out anytime. No.
No. I mean, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and so they want your job. What you find out is everybody pats you on the back, and then they hope you fail.
Right.
They can't wait for you. How'd that guy get that job? Look, he's an idiot. There's no way he can hold that job.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got to rely on, you have to rely on people that are willing to mentor, and it's very few. I mean, I learned that with the Daily Coach. That's one of the beautiful things about what we try to do with the Daily Coach is you can mentor. It's a way of giving back. Not a lot of people want to give back, and everybody wants to hold on to their knowledge as gold because they don't want to share it. Yeah. Walsh used to get very upset with people that would steal ideas or steal plays from other people because he was like, unless you've experienced it, then you can't solve it, right? So, if I steal a play from the Giants and I don't really understand how they put that play in, or if you steal a procedural technique from another doctor, but you don't really understand how he did it, and if something starts to go wrong, you're going to kill the patient. The patient's going to die. Same thing in football. If you steal a play and it breaks down, and the player comes to you and says, "What do we have to do to fix it?" and you don't have an answer, you've lost the player.
Yep. You're using that word steal, and it's funny because you reminded me of a colleague who, this is totally a different framing of the term, but because of that issue you brought up where unfortunately more people don't want to mentor, and I think if you're young and you're trying to get mentored, it's rejection, so it feels like rejection. He had reframed it in his mind where he would go serve under people, and if they weren't kind and didn't really help him along, the way he would frame it in his mind was, he robbed them. He robbed them of their knowledge. He said, and I think it sort of was empowering to him. It like twisted that around where here's someone that's trying to hold on to their knowledge and not wanting you around, and you felt belittled maybe in that environment. And in his mind, by making it, I'm here as a sleuth trying to steal mentorship, that helped him feel empowered in those roles. But it was such an interesting, the fact that he had done that, I thought in my head, why would you kind of view it that way? But then when you do realize no one's really offering free advice, you wish they did, but unfortunately they're not.
No, I mean, you have to the only advice you get is trial. You got to learn from, and if you're really good, you can learn from other people's mistakes. You can learn, watch other people. You can study other people and see what they do and their behaviors and how they handle stress. And I think that's really important, and especially in today's world where we have instantaneous communication. I mean, you can reach anybody.
Yeah. When you were part of, these teams, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, these teams are essentially large organizations, right? And you were at a number of them. Was there something about a particular organization that stood out to you, and can you label that it factor in any way? Like, is it, I know it's easily boiled down to platitudes like communication or something along those lines, but maybe being in a handful of them and saying, look, here's an observation of what really stood out as something different.
I think that when I was in organizations that won, we had alignment where the owner aligned everybody perfectly. San Francisco, DeBartolo trusted Walsh impeccably, and Walsh ran the organization. There was alignment. We were not talking about being on the same page. We were always talking about being aligned.
And in that means what in that context?
When you're aligned, there is no room for misinterpretation. When you're on the same page, hey, we're all trying to win the Super Bowl. Yeah, we're all trying to win. There's plenty of room for misinterpretation. And so when the owner, like I'll give you an example, when there's a story, that when Pat Riley still running the Miami Heat, we wrote a little bit about it in the Daily Coach, but Riley was asked by a bunch of players to fire Spoelstra. And he told the players to he'll meet downstairs in 10 minutes, go down there, and when he got down there, he told all the players line up against the wall, and then he told every player, some of them were superstars, that under no circumstances are they going to be able to control who's the head coach of the Miami Heat, and Spoelstra is the head coach. That's alignment. That's alignment. What's on the same page is if Riley would have agreed to him and said, yeah, I want to win, you want to win, okay, we're on the same page, okay, let's do something that makes us all the same. Now you're misaligned. And so the best organizations that I've worked for understood the difference between alignment and being on the same page. And the 49ers were aligned. The New England Patriots with Belichick were aligned. There was no misinterpretation. And you have to credit the ownerships of those teams for allowing that to happen. Because oftentimes in most pro sports, the misalignment occurs from who's talking to the owner. I wrote about it in Gridiron Genius, where Walsh would always complain about the general manager sitting with the owner and watching practice or going to the game, and the general manager would tell the coach is screwing things up and let's go out and have a martini while the coach is still working. They're on the same page. They all want to win, but they're not aligned.
Right. That makes me think of, granted, this is just John and I work at a practice, but we'll ultimately participate in larger health systems, which you see all across the country, right? Here in New York, maybe it's a New York University healthcare system or Yale University healthcare system. Those are large organizations. And what I've seen from an attempt to align those organizations, and maybe this is a misinterpretation from being naive, but you'll get a lot of language out of leadership, things like, okay, we need a mission, and that's going to be, patient experience and quality care and all these sort of what ultimately land like empty words, frankly. And if that sort of a corporate attempt to align, and I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No.
Like, if you put your the hard question, but if you put that concept you're articulating into a healthcare system or a company of any kind, how do you align? If that's your role to align everyone, and it's not those empty words, is there a recipe for it, or is it more lead by example?
There is. It starts with the owner. It starts with, it doesn't matter whether it's medical or restaurants. Danny Meyer from the Gramercy Tavern. His company's aligned because if someone gets a bad meal and writes a letter and complains to him, he doesn't say sorry. He finds out why and how to improve it. If somebody writes a letter to him and says he's had a great meal, he doesn't say thank you. He wants to know how he can make it better. So if you run Yale Medical and you're the head of Yale University Hospitals, and your customer and the customers, the satisfaction is really ultimately what you're about. Then everything evolves around that, and that starts from the top down. And the owner has to set that. The owner has to be able to live that life that makes it important. And so the owner spends time with the people on every single level of the company to make sure the customer's experience is good. Michael Gahn, the head of the South Point, a very incredible hotel, and it's called the South Point. It's at the south end of the Strip in Las Vegas, and it's kind of I don't know how to describe the hotel. It's got the best restaurant in Las Vegas. It's called Michael's. And yet it caters to rodeo, it caters to stock car. I mean, it's kind of an eclectic. You would never know the best restaurant in Vegas is in there. In fact, when you walk through the door of the restaurant from the casino into the restaurant, it's like you've covered 3,000 miles. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? But Michael Gahn has lunch every Thursday and Friday with people from all departments. To ask questions about what can they do better? How can they make this better? What's going on with this company? And if you're the leader of the team and you want everybody aligned, you're going to find out where there's misalignment, where they're saying they're on the same. Mission statements don't do any good. Saying we want to win the Super Bowl, that's great. That's a statement. How are we going to win the Super Bowl?
Yeah. This may be also a misconception, but at least from the the fan standpoint, one of the things that's always struck me about, I guess, any professional sports organization, but it does seem to be more football teams. Again, maybe that's wrong. And it gets back to this alignment issue. Turnover rates seem very high to me from the outside, right? It's kind of like if you're not winning, you're kind of turned over quickly. And that's always struck me from the sense, well, Jesus, very complex game, right? And a lot of players on the field, not like 5-on-5 with basketball. How do you maintain alignment and then a high level of functioning with that turnover aspect? Like, that stands out to me when I just think about a football team as an organization, as a company. I feel like if you took a fill in the blank Apple computers and you turned both the players, who I guess would be analogous to engineers in that example, and then also C-suite executives, who would be analogous to head coaches and GMs. Are folks who work in your field just used to turnover like that, or how do they deal with that?
Well, it's hard. I mean, what we're seeing now in our industry is we're seeing coaches, because of the turnover rate, coaches are basically taking their families to a city they want to live in. Like, let's say Nashville's become a very popular city.
Yep.
So instead of your kids living in the town you work in, you just basically put everybody in Nashville and know that they're going to stay in that school system for 5, 8, 10 years, and you're just going to have to live in an apartment by yourself and commute.
Right.
And that, because of the turnover rate in this league, is, it used to be you would get 4 years, 5 years to fix it. The problem with it is you turn over because you don't know why you're winning or why you're losing. And so the coach, instead of trying to make the coach better, you're constantly looking for a new coach. So if you do 50 things really well and you do 2 things shitty, I fire you for doing those 2 things you do bad, and I hire somebody else who does them really good, right? But that next person might only do 30 things good.
Right. Right.
So now I'm in the hole here, right? Yeah. And so that's so you're on this constant treadmill.
Yeah.
Right? So the Pittsburgh Steelers through the 50s and 60s were a disaster, and they couldn't get it right. Art Rooney Sr. was a wonderful man, and he just hired the wrong people. He hired people without really understanding who he was. And he was looking for a cure. He was looking for somebody to come in and define who he was. And finally, as he got older, he gave he fired a coach, and they decided to search for their next coach. And the next coach was going to be Joe Paterno. And Joe Paterno had just beaten Kansas in the Orange Bowl. The score was 14-13, and Paterno went for the 2-point conversion to win the game, and it didn't work. And yet Kansas was offside. Kansas had the great John Riggins at the time. Kansas was offsides, and they did it again. They won the game 15-14. And so now the Orange Bowl's over, and they want to hire Paterno. And Paterno accepts the job. And then that night he goes to sleep, he wakes up and he realizes he can't leave State College, that he loves State College, he can't leave, so he turns it down. And they hire Chuck Noll. And Noll comes in, and Rooney basically says, we are going to build the right coach. We're going to do everything organizationally to make him succeed. We're not going to ask him to be the perfect coach. We're going to make him the perfect coach. And which means, excuse me, which means whatever deficiencies he may have, we're going to supplement them. We're going to then allow the coach to build this. And they've had 3 coaches ever since. And they've won so many titles. And the scoreboard doesn't affect their decision making. They might have a bad year, but they're not going to listen to the media or outside perception. They're going to make their own decisions.
It's not a bad consolation prize with Chuck Noll. I'd say that.
Exactly. They get Chuck Noll, and it's incredible. In my new book, I write a lot about that.
I was going to tie that in.
I write about coaches, but I think the thing that's interesting about it is, Noll, think about this press box for a moment. Chuck Noll was the defensive coordinator of the San Diego Chargers. The offensive coordinator of the San Diego Chargers up in the press box with him was Al Davis. And then Sid Gilman was the head coach on the field. That's a pretty dynamic coaching staff.
That's an incredible coaching staff.
Yeah, think about that.
I don't know if you have a heart out, Michael. If you do, please let us know.
I've got 5:45, so
okay.
We got 4 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. In regards to that, too, with the whole Steelers discussion that you just brought up, too, I think it stems back to ownership and alignment. When you look at the Brooneys, even the Giants to a certain extent with the Maras, old guard families who just seem to get it. And if you want to hit on it, too, I think you were referencing it. You have a book called Football Done Right coming out. And correct me if I'm wrong, early September. I know all of us are really anticipating it. If you want to hit up on a little bit about when it comes out, and just tell us more.
Oh, thank you. It'll be out September 5th. It's be available everywhere. It's a book about. So I tried to put some context on how to get into the Hall of Fame. Marty Schottenheimer's won 200 games in his NFL career, regular season games. He's won 200 of them. There's been 514 guys that have called themselves head coaches in the NFL over the span through 514. 9 of them have won 200 games. You win 200 games, you should get in the Hall of Fame. I don't care if you won a Super Bowl, you haven't won a Super Bowl. You win 900 games, you should not pass go. You should collect $200. You should get in. Okay? So because there's no protocols, because there's no, you have to do this, this, and this to get in the Hall. You must meet these qualifications, much like you two had to meet qualifications in medical school to get your degree, right? There should be some criteria. So this next book, I try to explain the criteria. I rank the top coaches in the history of the game. I go through those coaches. I talk about the impact of television. talk about the NFL draft, talk about trades, and then I rank the top 100 players of all time.
How much blowback do you think you'll get?
Oh, I'll get killed. I'm fully prepared for it.
Right.
And when you work for Al Davis, there's no little kid sitting in his basement in Des Moines who's going to be able to give me. I mean, like he, I can take it. Trust me, I'm not that worried about it. But I mean, sure, Shannon Sharp, brother Sterling, isn't in the Hall of Fame, and he's one of the best receivers in football. Yeah. But he only played 7 years. But it's okay for Terrell Davis to only play 5 years and get 6 years and get in the Hall of Fame. Or Tony Baselli's an offensive lineman. He only played 7 years in the NFL. Most offensive linemen play at least 10 years. And yet he got in the Hall. So there's all these double standards that go on. This guy, and so again, it's elected. It's not selected.
Right.
You also
I was going to say, it sounds like a process
in there too, right?
What's that?
As a Jet fan, you have a what if chapter in there. That Peyton Manning Tennessee story haunts me. Haunts me. Yeah.
Yes. What if Belichick stayed? Yes. Very good, Doc.
But Michael, I want to thank you for your time. I know Dr. McHugh was extremely appreciative for joining us on House Call. It was really privilege and an honor. And we look forward to Football Done Right coming out. We look forward to continuing to read and to coach. And thanks once again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.